have you seen non-engineers use or like file incidents?
Yeah. I think what happens when you get that barrier lower and more incidents are filed and more people can see them is you start to sort of imagine as a non-engineer the things you could potentially also use this for. And if you're tagging appropriately, right, you can create different populations that are alerted for different types of incidents. So a natural one was one of our larger companies had a Sev 1 during the Texas power outages. They had a large portion of their user population, or sorry, employee population in Texas who had lost power. And this isn't, it's kind of an engineering problem, right? Like your engineers can't log in, but really it's an HR, people safety problem. And it was really the HR team pushing to go and file that incident. And I think when it first happened, that company was a little surprised. I remember we got some feedback from them that was like, "Hey, we filed an incident for this. Like, is that okay?" And we are like, "Yeah, of course. Like, you can file
Mm-hmm.
incidents for anything. Like, your marketing team can file an incident when, or your PR team can file an incident when like a bad article comes out. Like the process is the same. You're bringing a team together. You're dealing with it." And once it's responded to, you're probably writing a postmortem. Like, how did we get into such a bad relationship with the Washington Post that they wrote that terrible article about us? I don't think there's anything about incident management at its core process level that only works for engineering. I just think the engineering community has embraced it the most because it's, for lack of a better word, the biggest fire, right? It happens consistently in manageable ways that they really want to report on. What becomes challenging when you get out of the engineering org is metrics start to become a little bit more difficult, right? Like I think Dave Renzen over at Google has a talk that he gives about how marketing departments could adopt SLOs and SLAs. And I think, it's a really interesting talk as an engineer, but I think the reality is that the marketing department doesn't want to be measured on a lot of that stuff. So they want the core process because it's valuable. But like imagining how you might do metrics against them forces a lot of those organizations to kind of push back and say, well, we don't really want to be tracked on this. Like this isn't one of the ways we want our team to be measured. So I think that comes from hopefully making things more lightweight and making it more about process adoption for those types of teams. But even engineering outages deserve to have non-technical folks involved, right? Like if you have an outage, you probably need your PR person, your marketing person. If you're a B2B company, your salesperson, like they all probably need to know what's going on. And the worst
Mm-hmm.
thing you can have is all of them shooting emails, out to the eng manager or the responder themselves saying like, what's going on? What's going on? Is it going to be fixed? What's going on? And I think the reason people do that is we have this natural fear that the people we work with don't really understand how we're impacted by things, right? There's like an outage, and in the engineering community, we're pretty aware of the fact that if someone stopped typing, they're probably doing something important working on the problem. But in the sales world, they don't know that and they don't see the conversations you're having. So their impression is, well, maybe they're just not going to work on this till tomorrow. And they don't realize that it's having an impact on my ability to do my job. And so just making all this stuff more open just cuts down the overhead communication because they can see the channel, they can see the conversations, they can see what's going on. And you would think like the risk there would be, okay, now those channels just get super noisy.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, that's not what happens. Like what most people want is awareness of the response more than they really need to know like the details of every single action being taken. So given access to the channel and seeing that level of depth and conversation happening gets 90% of people to sort of back off and sort of let it continue to flow forward.